Hello and welcome back to the After Aston I podcast. I'm Katrina, I'm joined by Geoff, and today we're talking to Gabriella Bossman.
Gabriella is a 2015 Politics and International Relations graduate, and since leaving Aston she's worked at businesses such as Think Young, NCS and the Cabinet Office, and is now a Senior Operations Analyst at 3 Degrees Group. Alongside this, Gabriella is a green tech startup founder and founder-host of the Daughter of Guests podcast and community, which supports women from the diaspora in their goals, careers and entrepreneurship journeys. And, as the title suggests, she moved her career to Norway. Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us. It is fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. The way you introduced makes me feel quite grand, actually. Maybe I have achieved something since I graduated.
Well, first of all, happy International Women's Week. It's lovely to have you with us. What are you actually doing in Norway? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So with the new adventure, moving to a new country, it really provided me almost like a blank canvas to start again. And so I moved to the country with a real sort of desire, head, heart, body, everything desire to start my own company. And so I actually joined an accelerator program along with other people from across the world with Antler VC and began the journey to build a startup. And so for the first year that I was here, a year and a half, I was building that company, and it is in the green tech space. So I think after having worked in the UK government and then having had the experience of working with causes, I knew that I wanted to build something that had a mission behind it. So I started to build that. And then in the summer of last year, my desire was to deepen my understanding of the environmental green tech space. And so I moved to work within a green tech sustainability focused consultancy here. It's an American company, but has headquarters also here within Norway. And that's just from the sort of professional side of things. But besides that, I am also a startup founder coach for women. I am also a writer, a podcaster, and lots of other things in between. So really have begun quite an exciting adventure having moved here to Norway.
It sounds like it really does. But what made you move to Norway?
Yeah, it's really simple. My husband's Norwegian.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's easy.
We did live in the UK for some years during COVID before moving here. And actually, I can probably speak a little bit to why it felt quite easy to move abroad. So I had lived abroad the first time in my adult life. So I'd done that when I was younger on my placement year in Aston. And so when the sort of opportunity arose to say, hey, let's move somewhere, I thought, yeah, I've done this before, might as well, kind of thing. Probably should have thought a little bit more about it. No, but it's solely primarily because of that. But then now that I'm here, I can understand why someone else would make a decision outside of a relationship. But that was the big push. And now that I'm here, it's okay, I think I'll probably stay, not just because of him.
No, it sounds great. Did you always feel like you wanted to move abroad? Was that always in the plan?
Certainly. After Aston, I worked at Euromoney Institutional Investor. I was a senior program manager there, and that took me around the world. So I was based out of Southeast Asia, North America, South Africa. I was all across the place. And I can definitely say a lot of that was due to the experiences that I'd had having lived abroad in my university experience. So I don't know whether it was confidence, empowerment, or a bit of hubris that makes me feel like I can probably live anywhere. But yeah, definitely a great contributor to the sort of this journey living abroad.
You've mentioned a number of the things you've done and are doing in Oslo. What are the differences you've noticed in terms of the conditions, say, that exist for startups, and particularly for green tech? Is there a noticeable difference between the approach of Norway and the UK, or perhaps even Norway and the rest of Western Europe?
Oh, definitely. I would say the difference is also quite poignant in terms of the size of the ecosystem here. So this is a country of a population of, I think most people Norwegians would like to say almost 6 million. And if you put into perspective, the whole country is 6 million and probably just the southeast of London is 6 million. So it's quite a difference in terms of the size. And with the size comes differences in terms of the potential investment within this space or how many people actually take the step to building something. Norway, by many sort of research papers and investigations, is voted one of the top places to be and live, or the highest, I think it's on the happiness scale or something like that. There's a lot of social security and comfort here. But what that actually also leans towards is that there's potentially less of a push for or desire to begin an entrepreneurial venture or to be in a space that's a bit more risky. So I would say I definitely saw more by way of like entrepreneurial vim in the UK. But then there's also a lot of excitement here around building despite its size. So there's definite differences in the ecosystem across different places, despite it still being within Western Europe. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's a really interesting answer, because I think when we, in the UK, when we have this image of, say, Scandinavian countries in general, and particularly, I think, Norway, it always comes down to that very sort of British approach of, I call it the pint index. Everyone always goes, whatever else it's, here's how much a pint costs. And it must be the most expensive place in the world to live. But then nobody factors in all the other things that might balance that out, and the various different measures and the social fabric and so on and so forth. Has there been anything about that's not specifically pints, but about the kind of the general approach to life? I suppose you're married to someone Norwegian, but then once you're immersed in the culture, I assume you really start to notice all the little hidden things.
Oh, I wouldn't even know when to begin. I think this country is such a fascinating anthropological study in so many ways. There are just so many things that as I said, I assumed, it's Western Europe, so it's going to be not too dissimilar. But then it just hits you. The pint is one thing. A cucumber was what really got me. I used to go to an Aldi and getting a cucumber for something like 30p. And here it's the equivalent of £3. And even though it's locally sourced. So it's that was probably one of the biggest shocks from a sort of a cost perspective. However, the cost side of things is also paralleled with a great investment in people and actually a high standard of living. And so unlike places within the UK or even internationally, even within the developed world, here, people, if you work in a supermarket or anything like, you're still earning something that is like a true living wage. You could go ahead and have a mortgage. And that was really quite special to me. And I hadn't seen such ease in life, like the hustle and bustle that I was so used to, having grown up in London and studying in Birmingham and living in all the places that I have across the world. There was just this real sense of there's no need to rush here, even in terms of the pace that people walk. And these are all peripheral things, but they have a huge impact as to how people live and perceive the world here as well. And maybe there is a sense that Norway, for a Norwegian, is nirvana. It doesn't really get much better than this. You are safe. I could leave my laptop in a coffee shop, walk away somewhere, and it's still safe there. There's no one's going to steal that. Of course, this is absolutely incredible. And the amount of social security, it's like nowhere I've ever been before. But I also see that can sometimes lean towards a complacency. Everything is fine. So there's no need to improve the status quo. And so it's been quite an exciting journey to be a Brit and to be a Brit from the diaspora as well. So my heritage is from Ghana, and understand that actually where you are born or the culture that you are raised in has a huge impact on your drive. And I know we'll probably speak about this a little bit later with Daughter of Guests, but it's become really clear to me how much of an impact my life journey and challenges have actually contributed to how I am and how I exist and how I present myself to the world in a way that has been quite in quite stark contrast to some of my Norwegian counterparts. Yeah, so that's been a really interesting journey. It's almost, moving here has almost put a mirror to myself. It's like, in comparison to, or besides X, I have a deeper understanding of who I am or how I operate in a way. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. I was going to ask you as well, other than the cucumber prices, has anything else surprised you about living in Norway?
Besides costs, I think, now I'm 2 years in. If you had asked me right at the start, I probably could have just reeled off a few things, but I'm almost, dare I say it, am I assimilating? In a way, potentially. But let's say, okay, so another thing that has surprised me here is potentially, this has been a little bit of a challenge for me too. It's that language is so important. I have really had to push myself. I enjoy learning languages, so it's not so bad. But here, most people speak English, but if you're looking for employment, you're looking for opportunities, etc., it's really important to have the language. And so I have friends from across the world who have moved here with PhDs, masters, etc., who are incredibly well educated, but have struggled to find employment, which has been actually quite painful to witness, to understand how the system works in that way. It hasn't necessarily opened itself up to international talent. So that's been a bit of a disappointing surprise. But then if I flip that on the other side, one thing that I've been really surprised by that I think is incredibly beautiful is the approach to work. And here, I don't necessarily think I quite have that as an entrepreneur and doing all the things that I do. But here there is very much a way of living that is not, work isn't prioritized in the way that it is potentially in other places. You start at a certain time and by 4 you're done and then your life happens. There's a real sort of drive and desire to have work-life balance. People take a whole month off over the summer and it's almost compulsory across every company. And so the way of perceiving or engaging with work is that it's a great thing. I enjoy it. But then I'm able to explore and do other things, whether that's skiing or etc. And I think I've been really challenged by that. The hustle culture, for all it's good, can also be incredibly taxing. Be in a space where my environment encourages me to take a step back. It's just been surprising, but then also really empowering as well.
It sounds like it. One thing that you actually touched on, which was actually going to be, I think it was Geoff's question, to be completely honest with you, but about learning languages. You mentioned it can be a bit of a struggle. How are you finding that?
Yeah, so I do speak a conversational Norwegian, but my personality is minuscule. It's not like, it's very sort of surface level, but to understand it, I think I'm pretty good with it. It's not the most complicated of languages. I have studied others. I studied Arabic when I was in Aston. That was considerably harder. I studied Spanish prior to that. And then I have my 2 home mother tongues outside of English from Ghana. So language is something that I enjoy picking up on, etc. But it has been quite the journey to almost reconcile that it's okay for me to learn a language that I can only communicate with 5 million people in.
Well,
but it's such a small part of the world's population speaks. But I also recognize the beauty of language isn't just about communicating what you want. It's also like a deeper insight into the culture and how people operate, how they work, what's important to them. So I've also realized that there are some words that exist in Norwegian that aren't in English because of just context. There's multiple words for things around snow or ice and how it settles. It's important because there's a lot of that here. But at least in southern UK, there isn't as much. And so it's been a journey both in terms of learning how to speak the language, yes, but then also a deeper insight as to how the country is and what's important from a cultural perspective too.
Yeah, of course.
And as well as obviously the cultural changes, the language, and all this kind of stuff, you're doing that at the same time as setting up your own businesses.
Yes.
And you're being, as you touched on, you're being an entrepreneur in a society that, as you say, doesn't always have that kind of that hustle. Has that been an interesting kind of shift as well? Having to not just set up a business, which is obviously challenging anywhere, but doing it inside a new system, a new kind of environment almost, and with a culture that perhaps doesn't behave how you'd expect it to behave, say back in the UK, for example.
It's such a good question, Geoff. And it's something that I've reflected quite a lot on, for the good and the bad also. I think it's been challenging just from a logistical perspective, like setting up an official business, knowing where to go to get information, like how do I set this up? How do I do this legally, etc. But then it's also been challenging by way of the fact that there are specific businesses that are built here and that are incredibly successful. And that's just by nature of the size of them and what the country's sort of focus is on. It's a lot around energy, around sort of battery systems, around Actually, I would say that those are probably the primary spaces from a sort of a green and environmental perspective. And I was starting a business with two great colleagues on fashion sustainability. And that was a bit more head scratchy. And it's been really interesting actually, because very recently, if I give like a little anecdote, we were pitching till our faces were blue on this particular idea and managed to fundraise around it. But then quickly recognized that if we were going to fundraise any more, that we would have to pivot the solution to something a little different that was more widely understood by our ecosystem. And then just towards the end of last year, there was this global startup conference that was facilitated in Helsinki, where a company with exactly the same idea won the Startup of the Year competition and received $1 million in investment. And that was it, very much the same thing. And so it brought to bear again that it's a bit more challenging to explain things that are not fully understood within this ecosystem. And that makes it that much more challenging to build something that is not the norm here. But fortunately, because of its size, it actually makes it so much easier to connect to people. I know that the people talk a lot about 5 or 6 degrees of separation. Here it's 1. I could speak to the king if I wanted to through 2 people. It's because of the size, it's much easier to access people. And that actually fosters what I think has been a really refreshing community, just by virtue of how small it is. So we're all, as far as possible, at least I am, let's stick together. How do we support each other? Because there's so few of us that are doing what we're doing. And being in Oslo as well, there's an Oslo business region that's fantastic in supporting startups, whether that be through conferences, meetups, etc., such that you have this sense that it's like, I'm not alone, despite feeling like it can be quite lonely. And there's a lot of initiatives to also support international talent in coming and joining the startup ecosystem here. It's been a challenge logistically. It's been a challenge to explain and to branch into a sector or a space that is a little bit alien to where I am. But then it's also been incredible to almost for those reasons to build a community that has been built here as well. Hopefully that answers your question, Geoff.
It does. Do you want to give your business a bit of a shout out since you're here?
I'm currently now a shareholder in that company and it's still going, which is absolutely fantastic. But I have other companies that I'm building. I think there's something you get this entrepreneurial bug, and that's where a Daughter of Guests comes in. That's where Founder Fails also comes in. I'm also on this journey of building up a repository of all of my failures as an entrepreneur. And I say this from a really sober position, recognizing that there's a lot of conversation that exists around the successes of people in business. But I think it's really important to begin a greater discourse around failure, because in a way, we probably do learn more from our failures. And I had a lot of failures starting my company, a lot of things that in hindsight, I probably could have done better, a lot of things that I could have reflected a little bit more on, etc. So this is another company that I am beginning along with Daughter of Guests, which seeks to support women in the diaspora in their careers, in their own business journeys, etc., as I compile their stories, whether that be through podcasting or also through literature. It would feel a bit strange to shout out one specifically, and also as I support other businesses. So I'm also trying my hand at investing, be that in smaller tickets and coaching for other startup founders too. Putting together all of the experiences that I've had, either building a startup or working in a startup, or even in other environments that sort of play into some of the lessons learned and best practices that can support founders. That was a bit of a monologue, but just so that you have an understanding that it's like, okay, Gabs is doing a fair bit here, and it's been an incredible journey for sure.
So starting a business or many businesses in other countries, other cultures, even just starting businesses, is there anything you wish you'd known? And if you could go back and talk to past you and say, this is going to happen?
Oh, there are so many things, Geoff. I think I would begin by speaking to the importance of, one, just doing it. I think for many years, I'm very much a planner. I'm a project manager, portfolio manager that's my profession. And so let me just speak to myself. I love planning. I love setting structures. I love knowing what's coming, etc. And I've recognized that with starting any business, one of the key things is just doing it. You can plan for centuries, but putting yourself out there and understanding what the respective idea or the problem that you're solving is real is just do it. It can often feel like it's no, but I need to have this amount of money in place, or I need to have this kind of knowledge, etc. There are so many companies and businesses, grand or small, that have begun just with a personal desire to do something. And so I would definitely tell myself to just go ahead and do it is one. I would also speak to myself about the importance of who you begin something with, the people that you have around you. Some people are solopreneurs, and that's fine. It might be more challenging. It might take you a little bit longer. If that's how you see yourself best working, then that's one thing. But if you do have the desire to work with other people, I think it's so important to be really honest with yourself and with those people as to what you bring to the table, what your expectations are, what your vision is for the company, etc., so that there is a sort of a baseline understanding of what this thing could be and how you're going to contribute to it. It's a second thing that I've learned, and I would tell myself, think about this a little bit more. And the third thing is, don't use any money at first. And I say this because I was privileged enough to receive investment from a venture capital company for my tech startup, which is I'm incredibly grateful for. I'm by no means taking away from that and that being a journey. But I also recognize that there were some things I started to build or do with money that if I hadn't had anything, I probably would have better validated that this was something that was real. And something that I've learned over the course of this entrepreneurial journey is always to stick to the problem. Fall in love with the problem, because then the solution will flow from it. If you fall in love with the solution, you're going to try and retrofit it. It might be square peg, round hole, isn't that? If that's the expression, I think it is. And so I would definitely encourage anyone who's thinking of starting a business by doing it without putting a penny down first. And that's really, it could be as simple as just going out and asking people, is this something that's important to you? And being quite sober about how you approach that, not leading with any questions. Some of the biggest companies have begun with zero code, zero anything. I think it was, what's the name? What's the cloud-based Dropbox? That's it. They started simply with a landing page, which was free to create. Would you like to save things in the cloud? Thousands of people found this and said, yes, we want it. And then from there, since they had validated it, they were then able to build what people actually wanted. And so that would be the third point. First is just do it. Third is surround yourself with the right people and build with the right people. And the third is you don't need any money. Just validate. And then you can go on and invest in it. I know lots of people are looking for investment, etc., but there are so many solutions that you can create for the world's problems without a penny, and then grow it from there.
Brilliant. So, Gabriella, we always wrap up by asking the same 3 quickfire questions of our guests. Now, I know you've actually touched on the answers to a couple of these, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. So, number 1, what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned throughout your career so far?
What is the most valuable lesson? Oh, that's so hard. Absolutes are really difficult, aren't they? I won't say it's the most valuable, but it's clustered with a few others. It's in anything that you're doing, just ensuring that you're operating with integrity and that you are well aware of your values and your drivers. And that has been really important as I've set up a company in another land. It's been really important as I've created relationships as well in a new country. It's been really important as I have reflected on my passions, but then also my purpose. Integrity and values, and those being the drivers, and everything else falling from that, has definitely been a really important lesson. And not to say that I wasn't aware of that before, but I think when you are confronted by things more, like you're constantly being thrown things, new impressions, new ways of seeing things, new challenges, if you're able to hold on to those things, then you can always look back and say, even if I made a mistake, I know I operated the right way because I stuck to what was right at that point in time.
And question number 2 then. So what's next for you, Gabriella?
Oh, What is next for me? What isn't next for me? I think something that might feel a little contrary, but what's next for me is really identifying what rest looks like in the midst of everything. And that isn't maybe a very conventional answer, but being someone who is constantly doing, constantly has a project, constantly building or creating something or wanting to add value to the spaces that I'm in, I've recognized that I've put to the side rest. And maybe now I'm in a country where people herald and glorify rest so much, I'm struck by the fact that I actually don't know what that looks like, because everything that I've been passionate about that could just be a hobby has become a venture in some kind of way. And so what's next for me is really discovering what that looks like. Discovering is one thing, but maybe practicing that as well. And also championing rest for a community of people that are much like me, that are go hustle very often. I would love to be in this sort of an example of what it looks like to do those things, but then to also recognize and demonstrate the importance of rest in the midst of that.
And the very last question, where can people find you if they want to connect and find out more?
Yes, it has to be LinkedIn. I love having conversations with people there and then taking it from there, but do come and find me at Gabriella Bossman. Just as it says, just like that. So Gabriella, Bossman, on LinkedIn. And I'd be so happy to have conversations. Anyone who has felt any way struck by or challenged, etc., by the conversation, I'd love to begin it from there. And then I can point you in the direction of all of these other wonderful places.
Thank you. Gabriella, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us, and we wish you all the best in your new ventures and all the businesses and projects you're working on as well.
Thank you so much, both.
Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you so much.